Hello and welcome back to another Six Sages Gaming Duel Series. Today we have for you the top 4 match between Mono Fire and Mono Ice. This is from the Winnabox at Ziege Games. We do apologize for the angle based on the lighting in the shop, and wanting to make sure we could get some videos out, we had to use this wonderful angle. So this will be a best of 3 match, and again, this is a very interesting matchup because Vayne can go a long way to stop Emperor Zandi, and then you can get a little bit more done, but we are going to see how this goes. So on the left, we're starting off with a LeBeau, unfortunately overpaying for it, 4, so it must not have had a 2-drop in his hand, but giving plus 1000 power can go a long way in this matchup as well, because Ice does have the issue of being a little bit underpowered for its cost ratio, unless you have, say, Renoa on field who gets bigger with other FFA characters, or Squall and Laguna when they're out together becoming 10Ks. Is absolutely insane. Potentially 10Ks rather. So looks like both players are going to be starting off with some 4-drops. Well, both players starting it with the plus 1000 power backup. So this is still going to put the favor on the Fire players' side, because you can make Rubicante a 10K, which is quite a good spot to be in, considering that he is undercosted for that power, and his barrier shift is very, very strong. I have certainly won a couple games off that effect as well. And here we are starting with quite possibly one of the best turn 2s that you're going to get out of Fire. You get to play this card that when it leaves, you get to deal 9,000 to something. So we're playing this early to threaten not only the aggressive plays, so your opponent can then no longer play anything that's 5,000 power or less because it just dies, but also a very, very aggressive card that, should you find a way to deal with it, it's going to take another card with it. So absolutely one of the cards that is making Mono Fire playable in the current meta, and just is such a great card in general. So discarding 2 to play Devout here, that's why he's untapping his other backup. We're probably just going to see a pass here. So it looks like our Fire player will be getting the first point of damage in. Very nice hitting the EX burst, so the Emperor will be frozen on the next turn, not being able to untap, hopefully buying the Ice player a bit more time in this matchup. And then here we see a Tifa come down. So Scott has realized that he is going to just be the more aggressive route. A Vayne here actually would be pretty crippling, but he's just trying to fill the board with 10Ks, rush him down, and just have the bigger bodies on the board. Now we can't see Steve's discard, unfortunately, to see what he could be bringing back with Devout. I see the Renoa, which is certainly great to have, but that looks like it's his only valuable target. So here we see a Sid coming down to ping the Emperor for 4,000, I believe it is when he's stalled. And I think that's a Moomba in his hand. So Moomba would then deal 9,000 damage to it, which would kill it off. And I think there's just some back and forth discussions here saying if he should use it or not, because again, the understanding that he's going to have to lose a guy. But in this position, I would much rather just find a way to answer the Emperor. 2 for 1 yourself, unfortunately, but it is a card that you just want to get off the table and hope your opponent doesn't see another one. So it looks like we just had a pass here. I'm not sure why, but if that was a Moomba, it would have just got the... would have done some work there to get that card off the table, and would have forced his opponent to discard a card to hopefully slow him down a little bit. Tifa getting a point of damage, then playing Elan, which isn't doing much here. But again, you can see at this point, Scott is all in. He's saying, I know you don't have a board wipe. If you have another Jill or something, there's only 1 left in the deck. Sure, you get to freeze 2 of my guys, but certainly at this point, as the Ice player, you're trying to think of, okay, what do I have in the deck that can buy me a couple turns? Again, I would absolutely love to see Vayne here. That would go a very long way, but doesn't look like we're going to be that lucky in this matchup. And it looked like that was the Mannequin Kuja. Whenever it's targeted, your opponent discards a card. And what's great about the mannequin cards is that you can have multiple of them on the field. So if you're playing mono ice, you have this very nice beefy attacker that you normally wouldn't have otherwise. That you if you're drawing extra of them late game, it's never really a dead card either because you can just play multiple of them because they do have the common soldier icon. Now I am looking at the list, and it appears that there is only 2 Vayne in the mono ice list. If you are playing mono ice or trying to make it work in this current meta, I would very strongly recommend running the full playset. His S effect is great against all decks. And then again, just for how important it can be in the mono fire matchup or any deck that's running 5 drops and higher, is absolutely worth bringing back as much as you can. So Tifa is going to come in saying Sid can't block, take a point of damage. Land's going to come in, and that's why he forced the block that way, so he wouldn't be able to. Looks like we had the Blyes for the first strike, actually. So first strike and draw card is certainly a good place to be. And then the other Jill being flipped. So again, seeing the 2-drop Jill here would certainly be nice, but at 4 points of damage, 4 and on, your opponent has 2 very big threats and then 1 you can eventually answer. You need to find that Vayne. Again, our opponent's been keeping only 1 card in hand during this time, so it'd be very easy if we had a Vayne to stall for a couple turns. Our opponent would have to find resources, be it 2 effort or something. But then we'd just be able to devout Vayne back, keep the Emperor and Tifa locked down, and then only take 1 damage a turn from land. So a very bold choice to attack here. Trying to just get in a point of damage while I can. Flips another land, a card he doesn't really care about. It looks like he should have a few cards in hand plus the devout, so he could bring back another card if he wanted to. Again, Renault is not terrible here because it would be able to tap down his opponent's board and, stall out for a turn if you really needed to, but probably not where you want to be. So 5 for a big Laguna. And it must be a Squall in the break zone if he's using his devout here. Yep. So his opponent's going to discard, well, only 1 card, unfortunately. And it looks like Steve's going to get rid of the rest of his hand. So we now have a 2 10Ks on the board to help block. But again, our opponent also has the Tifa, which can just say one of them is not going to be able to block. And the Zonde can threaten the 5K ping and then 9K on the way out to guarantee it's taking out your best guy. So again, land getting in a free point of damage here, flipping another Jill, going to 5. Tifa is going to come in, say one of them can't block. Probably the Laguna in this case. Yep. And it looks like we're just doing the sacrificial trade here as well. Thanks to both having the 1K backup on board being interesting. And then, of course, the last card is just going to have to get through and get a point of damage. And saying 5K to Sid. Which, if I'm not mistaken, that should be enough to kill Sid. Who's a... Actually, no, he is a 5K, so he is a 6 currently. And not a lot here that's going to be able to draw him out of this position. Can't really block land. Desperado, or not Desperado, but Laguna's auto effect deals 7,000 is not going to answer it. So we really have to draw Desperado and another card to be able to lock down Emperor during this turn. So, ooh, interesting. A Moomba. So that's going to deal the 9,000 Emperor, and then Laguna here is going to finish it off on the damage effect to hit it for 7K. The downside here is Scott can just get rid of his last blocker. Your opponent has no cards in hand, so no matter what, the land's going to get through for a point of damage. So up 1 for Fire, and then we're going to be going into the next game. So again, very interesting how different that game would have played out if the early Vayne would have been able to come down and lock it up so that the Emperor and Tifa couldn't do anything. So going into game 2, looks like players are going to discuss some mulligans. So again, since this is best of 3 now, if I was the ice player, I would be digging very hard for Vayne. The rest of the cards are going to come. Unfortunately, same start from the last game for the Mono Fire player here. But knowing what I know, that my opponent has the Tifa and the Emperors to worry about, 100% your most important card then becomes Vayne. All right, looks like we're playing a Sarah, which interacts with the snow, and which he is playing 3 of the 1-drop heroic snow, which is interesting. And then decides to play the Jill. Interesting. That's one that says your forwards can't be dealt damage by backups your opponent controls. So it shuts off things like Vasoya, can stop things like Black Mage, just a lot of those different ping effects that can help stall. So again, deciding to go the aggressive route here with the Tifa. So again, in the same position, it's a 10k, so it's a big beefy body. It can make sure something doesn't block every turn, so it is guaranteed getting an point of damage on this next turn, or at least being able to make sure your opponent's best forward isn't blocking. And again, it turns out when you get that early Tifa or that early Emperor and just have this big body, it really helps the mono red decks be more aggressive. If we look to recent events out of Japan, some of them have went more fire lightning and getting rid of Emperor and only having Tifa as your 5-drop, which is certainly an interesting comparison to make. I think there's enough cards to make the fire still good enough where you can run Emperor. But we'll see. Finally, Vayne coming down. So being able to lock down the Tifa, it's not going to be able to reactivate. And here's the important thing. It also then makes all the rest of the Tifas in the deck dead. And there is 5 other Tifas in the deck, if I'm not mistaken. It's either 4 or 5. I forget how many the 5-drop was ran in the list at that time. So yes, those cards can still generate crystal points. Don't get me wrong, but now our opponent is stuck with this card. Now again, he can also still use it for Falcon's Dive if he has other forwards and can be aggressive with it. But certainly that Tifa wants to be attacking every turn and doesn't get to apply pressure where it would want to. So Vayne's going to be getting for some damage. And it looks like Scott is just going to need to take some time, build up his backups until he can find a card that's going to either answer Vayne, which is now a 9k, or find a way to either double Ifrit it or something along those lines. And again, keeping in mind that he has Jill on board, so he can't ping it with backups. So he's going to use a mannequin here, which deals 2k, I believe it is. So it would have to be... It looks like he has a Blaya, so he might be able to bait Belias Ifrit. Nope, just passes. So it looks like he's going to set that up on the next turn, try to bait into a Belias trade up. So we'll see if that is the play that he goes for. And again, if you're going against mono red, you also just have to assume that they have some kind of ping effect or some damage trade up effect. Because mono red is all about playing those low to the ground guys who can trade up with things like the selfie backup or a couple other battle tricks. Ooh, hitting a Tifa, so again, getting rid of what would have been a dead draw otherwise mostly. And then playing a Kuja. And Kuja is a really strong card here in this position again, so it becomes a 10k. And when your opponent tries to answer it, and especially in a red deck that has to, say, use 2 different cards or 2 effects to target it, they're going to be discarding a lot of cards in the process. So I am all for the Kuja play onto this board. And again, it is just going to be bigger than a lot of the stuff that your mono red player is going to be able to play at this point outside of, again, the Emperor. So now we're finally playing a more real game where both everyone is using all their backups, getting some resources going, and being a little bit smarter with their plays. And then the note here that I always like to mention, if you're going to play something that's not going to immediately impact the board, make sure you're playing it during the second main phase. Especially in this case, I guess your opponent can only hit like an Ifrit, for example, but if your opponent has an Ifrit in hand, and let's say they hit an Ifrit, they can then 12k something that you would have just invested resources into and put you further behind. And Renoa here is not getting boosted by any other characters. It's not nothing else is a Final Fantasy VIII, but it is still a 7k that can threaten tapping down the rest of your board, so it gets in for a point of damage every turn. Fire player plays Bosch here, which would actually be really nice if you can draw another one. He would be able to get Vayne and Renoa off the table at instant speed, so at the quote-unquote end of your opponent's turn, likely after they played something, if they're going to, you'd be able to get their two guys off the field. Renoa would dull your characters, but then you would just activate them right away and not lose any tempo in the process. So I tested that over Red 13 in those lists because nobody plays Golbez locally, or at least they didn't before this event. So we were safe to have some fun with our 3-drops in the deck. But again, if you are now playing Mono Red or Mono Lightning in your locals and you expect Golbez, you absolutely have to be running either Red 13 for the Mono Fire decks and Cypher for the Mono Lightning decks. Again, can't stress enough, if you don't run those cards, a good Golbez player will beat you 99 times out of 100. The matchup is that skewed against, or I should say in favor of the Golbez decks. So it looks like there's just some discussion going back and forth about some plays that are going to be considered. Ooh, interesting. Using the Shooting Star, I believe is the name of the special, to freeze a forward and freeze a backup of your opponent that your opponent controls. So again, very wise to lock down the Bosch while he could, because again, for the very fact that I just mentioned that not deal 9k to 2 things play would definitely set us back a bit. So looks like we're finally going to get some tricks going, and Ifrit to use the trade up, if you will. Now the downside is here that we don't have a Devout to get our card back immediately, but at this point it is 0 damage to 5, so the Ice player is very far ahead, and Renoa again can do a lot of work in this game just to threaten to be able to tap down your opponent's entire team. So you just attack with that first every turn, knowing that whatever else you have on board will likely get through if they decide to block. Again, Mono Red doesn't have any way to activate their characters. There's no water in it, obviously, so the path is clear after that Renoa breaks. It looks like there's 3 cards in hand, so it's just a pass, and then those 2 cards are still frozen, so Tifa is going to be activated now finally, but the tempo that she would have had early on is now completely gone, in the sense that she's not going to be doing a lot in this matchup. In terms of being the aggressor, yes, it is still a very good effect, and it can win the game if he's able to stabilize, but at this point, if my opponent has a hard to answer, hard to deal with 10k without me having to discard or use a lot of resources, especially when they have gel on the table, that sounds like a losing battle. So played a Zengen here to tutor up Tifa, potentially use Falcon's Dive at some point, but I'm assuming more than likely just to be a I want to block your Kuja trade and then have a Tifa with haste on the backswing, which seems like a perfectly fine play in this scenario. Ugh. So here we're going to see a Shiva to dull and freeze and get in the last points of damage. So that'll be it for game 2, getting them to 1-1 in this series. So going on to game 3, and again, I just want to point out how important you can tell that Vayne was during that matchup, because it can completely stop any aggression from Tifa, or more importantly, when it does happen, Emperor. And especially if we would have saw Vayne early on in that first game with both Tifa and Emperor on the board, it would have just completely shut them off. The next deck that I'm going to be doing a deck spotlight on, and hopefully get to play at locals, will be the Mono Ice list. I believe his name was Vice, a Japanese player that's been kind of the champion for Mono Ice. He has an amazing list that I want to feature and get out there. And it can be difficult to see some mono element decks still do well, because a lot of people are trying new things. There's a lot of 2-colored elements going on, but I think that Mono Fire, Mono Ice, and Mono Lightning still have their place in the meta. And we're going to talk about that more in a couple weeks with our updated mid Opus 2 meta report. And hard to see what Scott started with here, because I was playing with his cards right over it, but looks like he started with another 4-drop. 3 or 4-drop, unfortunately, on his first turn. And for a red deck that has, I think, 6 or 8 2-drop backups, it's very odd that he started with a higher costed backup all of these games. Nope, start with the Zengen. So again, playing the backup Jill that protects from backup damage, which again is an interesting choice. We did see that our opponent is playing Black Mage, I believe it is the one that deals 4,000 for 1 red. It can certainly help shut off those type of cards, but he hadn't seen a Fusuya or anything like that, so it's difficult to gauge when you would play those, if you'd play either one. But I certainly think that card has its place in this matchup. It just all depends on how much backup related damage your opponent's running. And here we go again, starting off with the Tifa. So he had the 4-drop Tifa in his hand and the 5-drop. And an interesting note here is I might have just went for the more aggressive play, because we have the Zengen to start. I would have just led with the 4-drop, get in a point of damage, and that leaves up Water Kick on our next turn, so we can either A, remove a blocker, or B, best case scenario, we get to kill something for free. In this case, just attacking with Tifa lets you ignore, quote-unquote, the blocker as well. But I think that playing it the other way would have been a little bit safer. And then Imperial Mannequin, if your opponent plays 2 things, it gets bumped up to a 7k. So now a lot of things that the Ice player could have in this scenario, chances are that he's going to be able to get the 2 points of damage in. And yep, and here we see Snow coming down just to tap things. So that's not going to be blocking anything of relevant size. It's really just meant to be here for being aggressive, tapping things down, and comboing it out with Jill to freeze something that you might not be able to freeze otherwise. Interesting. Discarding down to get Sephiroth, which does give him a first strike blocker, and he's up on a backup, so you're technically ahead on the resource race in this. But Tifa again is just going to make it where it can't block, knowing that the Snow isn't going to be doing anything. So 2 points of damage are going to be getting in, absolutely. First one flipping the Sid, second point of damage coming in from the Imperial, the Mannequin. Hitting the Duke off the top, which certainly hurts. Making that Sephiroth an 8k first striker, once of course you answer the Tifa, is very strong against the Mono Fire decks. And here it looks like he's going to play something, then reminded that he's going to play something else. Ooh, hitting the Emperor off the top. Certainly a good hit for him. And then playing Vayne again to tap down the Tifa. That just feels great. And an interesting note here is it is fairly safe to play that, even though our opponent hasn't seen Emperor yet, because we just hit an Emperor, so it's unlikely that they have one in hand, and also it's going to stop Tifa, so Sephiroth can block in a couple turns when he's activated again, if that's the route he wants to go. But in this case, he just gets to be aggressive. So now that Snow is going to be putting in some work, going to get rid of his last blocker, and start swinging in for points of damage. So very quickly, this game shifted for the Mono Ice player. Again, that Vayne is just absolutely crushing when you get to play it at the right time in certain matchups. Vayne has also been very good for me against the Opus 1 Dark Emperor. That's a 9k 5 drop, and that then gets stuck on the field and they have other dead cards in their hand. Oh, and flipping the other Emperor. So our mono red player is pretty doomed at this point. You'd have to produce another couple blockers, and whew, yep, our mono red player needs something short of a miracle to crawl himself back out of this one. That snow is only a 1-drop, but it is certainly very, very threatening when you're not able to produce a lot of forwards on the board because you only have one backup. And that's the thing I love about Final Fantasy. You do have to play this self-management, self-resource management game where if you just try to be aggressive right out the gate and don't have a lot of backups, chances are you are going to fall behind and not be able to keep up with the pace of the game. And that's him just verifying which Jill that was and what the effect of it was, and the other card that says that snow can't be. I believe it's abilities. I don't have the card right in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure that Sarah protects snow from abilities. It's abilities or summons. It's one or the other. Not incredibly relevant right now, but again, can help him from some pretty nasty abilities. The only other thing that might help in this situation, even though he only has one backup, and I can't see how many cards he has in his hand, so we might not be able to pull off, but playing a Bahamut here to get the Vayne, you probably take Vayne Sephiroth, I guess? It's certainly Vayne than either Laguna or Sephiroth. Oh, look, it is Bahamut. Interesting. Taking the snow is a very interesting choice here, and those should be removed from game for Devout, which is extremely relevant, but you decided to go with those instead, and it looks like Scott will, yep, he caught it. So again, very interesting. I think Vayne is 100% the card you take, and then you probably take Snow if you don't have if the last card in your hand isn't great after burning through all your resources with Bahamut. And hitting the Rubicante feels terrible there. And here he's saying that they'll trade because it gets boosted to a 7k. Now their opponent has the backup that gives plus 1,000 power. So he was certainly able to help neutralize the board here a little bit. Again, that Sephiroth is still quite deadly. And then just playing a Kuja for value. So at this point, the fire player is dead to pretty much Shiva, another Laguna, a number of other dull effects. And ultimately, that is going to be the way that this match goes. So that is all that I have for this video for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. We will have the top 2 match up here next. Won't have any. If you follow the page, you already know what's coming, but it's going to be Mono Ice versus Golbez in the finals. And you can find all these lists on our Facebook page at Six Sages Gaming. Follow us on Twitter; they're posted there as well. And we're happy to share all the results for you. So we will have more deck lists, more duel series, a lot more content coming up for you guys in the future. But we always like to make sure that we have time to preview some games from Ziege. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next Six Sages Gaming Duel Series. Have a good one.